Welcome back to the Drummer Mindset Podcast with me, Joel Pereira. This is an exciting one. It's a little bit different for a couple of reasons. One, no video for this one. I didn't set up the camera for this one. I really liked how it went. I liked not having to worry about the editing, the lighting, all of that. So we're going to try it for a while without. There's still a couple that I have in the can that do have some videos, so you'll still see those. I may still post those, but after that, I'm going to go for a while without any video. I think it's just going to be a better quality audio podcast. You'll still find me on YouTube. It'll be posted there, but you'll just see my logo cover page there. This one's also different because I have my first non-drummer. And so while we still obviously talk in large part about drums, I think it's really important to get a perspective from all kinds of people that you're surrounded by that can better help you understand you, you know. It's always helpful when you surround yourself with people that you trust, so that they can call you on your stuff, or they can just kind of, you know, sometimes provide advice or just friendship or whatever. It helps you better understand yourself and others. And so I think it's also true in any work setting, and definitely also musically as well. So CaroMia Humphrey, she's a vocalist, multi-instrumentalist, band leader. You can catch her every Monday from 8 to 10 p.m. at 5 Walnut Wine Bar in downtown Asheville. You'll see her there with Ron Mandelkorn, Danny Iannucci, and Jazz Urias. Jazz, who if you haven't seen it yet, that's my first podcast. Go back and check it out. Jazz is a great drummer, and it's definitely a good conversation. But otherwise, you can also see CaroMia every Tuesday from 6 to 8 p.m. at French Broad Outfitters with a rotating cast of musicians. It's really pretty exciting, special to get to see who she can pull in to make different sounds with. So definitely go check that out. So some topics that we cover on this one. We talk about how she views the job of the drummer, the communication on stage, both vocally and musically that are helpful. We also get into how to, kind of developing your instrument. We also talk about her musical experience abroad and eventually going to music school. We talk about preparation for gigs and finding inspiration to play. And so we cover a lot. Fact check. So minute 25, around 25:20, something like that. I mentioned Herbie Hancock and how he played with John Coltrane. And there was a story, but it was not John Coltrane. And I don't think he ever played with John Coltrane. So, but he did play a lot with Miles Davis. And so it was a story that he shares about Miles Davis regarding mistakes. And so that is, I'm going to provide a link to that story on YouTube that you can go check out. It's a good one. But otherwise, we'll start the show. I just kind of wanted to restate some things, and to, I guess, give you a little bit more knowledge about what I'm aiming to find in, my own path, because I think that kind of helps. But I mean, sure, long story short, I've decided to transition out of medical career and then focus again on music, because that was it has always been a big part of my life, but just not creating it lately. Just for other reasons. And so I found myself in this situation where I was lucky enough to be able to kind of recalibrate and reprioritize. And so part of that was, so I closed my psychiatric practice in December. I'm a PA, not an MD, just to be clear. And so then, pretty much immediately started signing up for lessons, with a bunch of drummers that were local and some online, trying to craft this music school, because I initially started as a music major in school, and played in played in the jazz band, as a percussionist at that point, and then quickly kind of fell out of that just due to distraction and other things going on. And so, but in any case, so I've been trying to kind of like just trying to make that up in some way. And I also like to just talk about music in general. And so like after talking with several drummers and like me, really focusing on just listening as a form and of learning and going to a lot of shows. And I didn't realize like how many great opportunities there were in this town on like Mondays and Tuesday nights, right? Like just free walk in and like you from like Little Jumbo with like Justin Ray and all the folks that go through there, Jay Sanders and the Page brothers and Mike Holstein. And then when I was chatting with Evan Martin, who was playing drums with the Core over there. And he came over and he was providing lessons because he's a drummer, but he's also, he's a multi-instrumentalist. So he would come over and like jam, and we would have those conversations in that way because I hadn't jammed with anyone in a long time. Mm-hmm. And so he mentioned you first off, like as far as someone to go see, and then also just automatically started talking about how it's such a great environment as a drummer, because he spoke a bit about how you, from his perspective, it's like you utilize the drums in a different way. Like I don't know if it like vocally the choices you make or what, maybe you can speak to that. Like how do you use the drums in a way, or like what is your perspective on that?
See, I feel like that reminds me of what you just said, where you can't read the label when you're in the jar.
Right.
I don't really know. Yeah. I can't really speak to that.
Okay. That's fair. I mean, and that's also really interesting to me too. Like if it just happens naturally, mm-hmm. like if you're, within a band and you just can like accept everything that's kind of coming in and listen, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's one of the biggest parts, is just listening to what's going on around you.
Yeah, for sure.
And so if it just naturally happens, and maybe like what I've come to, I've like been thinking about this for a while. It's like, maybe it's just like true professionalism, like people that work on their craft constantly. And then, if you're serving the music in that way, like that is what happens.
Yeah.
Like if you're paying attention and open.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, you and I like chatted about this or something similar some weeks ago, and it's not something I've ever thought about, but one thing that kind of came up for me was I think that I really dial into the drums because of my background of playing music. I played music just by myself for the first probably 10 years, where I was just in my room writing my own songs, just me on piano and vocals.
And how old were you when you started playing?
I started when I was 8.
Okay.
And I really developed my own sense of rhythm with that. Like my songwriting at the time, it would change feels and tempos like throughout the song. And it felt really natural. Like when people would listen to it, you almost didn't notice that there was a tempo change because it just felt, it like moved in this really natural way.
Yeah.
But then when I started playing with people, it was like very confusing for everyone because we're like, what is, like they could not play with me. Okay.
And did you have formal training, or is this something that you were kind of figuring out on your own?
No, it was just on my own.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually was like very stubborn. I like refused to take lessons.
Were your folks musical? What was that like?
They were music lovers. Yeah, but they didn't like play music. But yeah, I think but then I ended up studying music in college. So I had no formal training, and then I jumped into like to it at that level, and had to like dial my my tempo in, obviously, and change the whole thing. But I think because it was such something I developed later, just like I could not, learning how to play with a click track or play with a drummer was something I had to figure out later in my musical life. I think I've really dialed into listening to the drummer, maybe in a way that people don't if they just always played with drummers. I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, I think my limited experience with that is just that, well, there's, different bands that I've played with, and it's always a different role. Like, different band leaders have a different idea. Sometimes you very much feel like just like, the the grunt for hire,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so it's like fit this, provide the support, you know, and you stay on this time, like don't do anything else. And then sometimes it's like people really do, and most people really do rely on you because, like you were saying just before you know, the shit, like we started recording, like it can take up so much space, like the drums,
Yeah.
right? And so like there can be a lot of responsibility with that.
Oh yeah, I think it's like the most important aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if the drums, if that's not there, it's like no one is gonna sound good. I feel like there's no other instrument in the band that has the ability to like bring it up
Mm-hmm.
or train wreck it so fast.
Right. Totally.
So yeah, I think it's extremely important, and it's. I think a lot of the drummers that I've like loved playing with the most really approach it as a musical instrument, not just like, you know, a rhythmic aspect. Like I feel like um yeah, Yaris Yokley.
Is that okay? Yeah,
Right.
I never know how to say his name. Jaris. I never know.
Yeah, I think it's Yaris.
Yeah, okay.
um
But yeah, I think
he brings that, like he's the way he plays is very almost melodic, and it's like a little more musical than.
yeah, he's an interesting player for sure. There's all different kinds of drummers. You know, there's folks that just kind of keep time, and then the folks that can, you know, it's even amazing just how musically he can be when it's just on a track, like a recorded track,
Yeah.
and what he does within that. And that's most of the videos I've seen of him. That's most of the performances I've seen of him as a minor artist and stuff like that. It's just like those kinds of things. But, you know, it's always an unusual setup. Often is an unusual setup, you know, where he has like cymbals all on one side and then all the drums on the right side. And, you know, there's always texture elements. So he's like, you know, as much a percussionist as he is like the backbeat or
Right.
the timekeeper, you know. And so, yeah, that texture, I think, for me, like my perspective, like playing when I did, like, you know, more heavily like 20 years ago, and then having a long hiatus for career, family, and whatnot, and then coming back, and maybe it's just like who's around Asheville now or who I'm finally finding, but you are getting the sense more like there's a little bit more cohesion or something like that, and maybe it's just me. I'm just that's part of what I'm trying to figure out too. Is like
In the Asheville music scene?
yeah, and I think in a
Yeah.
lot of music anyway, and maybe it's my taste too. That's changed a lot,
Uh-huh.
you know. So like that's a part of it. Listening to a lot more soul music now,
Mm-hmm.
and like neo soul or progressive or whatever subgenre that you want, you know, you can talk about. But yeah, it's interesting how, like, you know, there used to be such a dichotomy of drummers between the drummers and percussionists. You know, like one set knows how to
Okay.
like provide that kind of texture, feel, kind of rhythm support, highlights, and the other one's the beat. And now I'm just seeing more and more that they're kind of combining within one person, you know, which is
Mhm.
like a whole other thing
That's
to
interesting.
me. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so, and I think with that too, you know, there comes a lot of understanding and maybe that communication too. It seems like at least what you have with your drummers. So back to kind of that story. So Evan Martin was like immediately told me about you, and so I went and caught you, and then I think that's when I met Jazz as well,
Yeah.
and incredible player.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He's amazing.
Yeah, I love watching and hearing him play. I feel like it's like a lesson for me every time.
Yeah.
And especially just his minimalist approach, but also
Totally.
what I talk about is like he gets so much out of so little.
Yep.
Like you know, and there's a few drummers, like some of my favorites, and you know, drummers are like that, where it's just a bass, snare, and hi hat sometimes, and that's all they need, and sometimes less, right?
Right.
But you know, and he has told me, and he was on the podcast already. But you know, he's gotten at this point in life, one of the ways that he's been navigating his progression in music is to just be really clear and boundaried about who he plays with.
Mhm.
And a regular gig with you and with in Rom and the whole crew at
Yeah.
5 Walnut, that's one thing he holds on to.
Yeah.
You and Elon JD, and
Yeah.
that's like kind of right now, other than working on his own music,
Right.
So that's significant.
Yeah.
And then also Jacob Coates that I had,
Uh-huh.
and and these were all like just what they were telling me.
Yeah.
Like Jacob talked about like
Aw.
learning how to do vocals, and also just like kind of keeping that context of like it helped him a lot, just kind of get out of that competitive mindset of like what it's like thinking about yourself as a drummer, and how you kind of, and what he said is that you just kind of brought up like you're different people, you're different artists, like stop comparing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, Jacob brings so much to the table. Like, even though he's not a super technical drummer, he has his background is in surf rock and just high it's all vibe and high energy, and like, but before we started playing together, I think that was pretty much what he had done, was Shorty Candy books.
Right.
Yeah, and he has like a looseness about his playing, and he's a different kind of drummer than Jazz or Yaris or Phil Bronson or like some of the other great drummers that I've played with, but I love playing with him just as much. Like,
Nice.
he has so much vibe and soul. It's not sometimes there's just like it's all about like how it makes you feel.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And if what you're doing makes people feel something, it makes them feel good, it makes them feel like relaxed, and then that's what more do you need?
Yeah.
As any musician.
Yeah.
As a vocalist, you don't need some like crazy range. You don't need all this technical ability. Some of the greatest songwriters and singers have had a really limited palette to work with, and have just done the most that they've expressed themselves through that small palette, through like their 1 octave vocal range.
Yeah.
And you don't miss anything. It's like it's really just about how it makes people feel, how it makes you feel.
Yeah.
Maybe that's even more important, how it makes you feel, and then that emotes to how the audience is going to feel.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's a trap for drummers too. Like, if you've been shedding on some lick or something like that, you really want to bring it out, what are you, and so you do, and it just oftentimes, like, it's one of those things, like, it's something you're forcing because you've been working on it. And I think the job is really not doing that. Like, you can always have that in your toolkit, if it comes out.
Right.
But like, you spend all that time shedding so that you don't have to think about it in the performance. And then you're just listening and being present.
Totally.
So one of the things that I talk a lot about here too is just kind of like blocks that people have. If it's and for drummers, a lot of times it's practice. And I think vocals are and I think that there's going to be commonality among any instrumentalist, any musician, for sure. Obviously, my perspective is drums, but I also draw a correlation between voice and drums too. Like, if like in a primitive sense, like our
like
first,
the first
two,
instruments.
right? And so with drums, it's I don't know, like, there's so much. It's so athletic, it's so physical, and then it's mental and it's emotional and all these things. Like, so again, coming from this mental health background and like understanding, there's the concept in the book, the body keeps the score, right? Like, so even if we're in that jar and can't read the label, and sometimes we don't realize maybe something was traumatic or bothering us, then our body tells us in some way. A lot of times in the gut, but sometimes it could be muscle tension or whatever it is, right? And so it's a constant check-in when you're playing the drums, right? And sometimes it's like a chronic pain issue, old injury, didn't sleep well enough, didn't eat well, all these kinds of things that can affect the way that you play. Sometimes it's like a millimeter off, like 4 times just not set up right.
Right.
The snare or whatever, or the room doesn't sound just right. And it can really throw you. If your tones are not right, it's not you're going for a note and it doesn't sound like what you had in your head, it can really throw you off, right? I mean, I imagine vocals.
Yeah. Well, the vocals are unique in that you literally wake up each day with a new instrument. Like it's never the same. I do a lot of home recording, and when I'm working on a song at night after I've been singing for a few hours, and then if I get up in the morning and come back and try and finish the verse or something, there's such a big change in the tone of my voice and the whole thing. Like I'm constantly, all vocalists are constantly working with a different instrument. So I think for me, I've just really tried to learn how to embrace whatever qualities my voice has that day, whether I'm recording or playing live, and play to that. Just like you have to play to a room, you have to like adjust your approach depending on what you're working with. And it is very like the drums and other instruments, maybe not as physical as the drums, but it still is a physical thing. Like you have to like keep your voice warmed up. You got to keep it going. If you don't sing for a week, you can definitely
right
see a big difference. But I think,
what I would imagine too is like it's more fine-tuned in a lot of ways too, right? Like, because with the drum, like there are those things, and you're not playing right, then that can throw you off. And at the same time, you can get pretty close, or you can just beat a drum into a tone, right? And that's never musical playing, and or rarely is. I mean, in some forms of music that's appropriate, but at the same time, like you can kind of fiddle with it in that way. But I would imagine like all the same environmental stuff that goes on for your voice can really,
it can make a big difference. But I think for me, the most important thing is like, I wouldn't even call it a mental aspect. It's like, I mean, this is a very like vague term, but it's something like even deeper than that. It's like my like soul and spirit has to be like connected. And if I can get that connection going, everything from that point on sounds good.
Can I ask you how you find that sometimes, or like what are your go-tos if it's
sometimes it's so funny because this is something that Ram and I talk about sometimes and like differ in, because
and Ram is your partner, just kind of for the audience. Ram is your partner, amazing musician in his own right, and that's where I've seen y'all play a lot together.
Yeah,
but y'all have had a lot of separate projects as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and when we're like getting ready for something, like we play a lot of weddings and stuff on the weekends. Some of those like money making gigs where you're having to learn like 10 new songs to do, and there's a lot of preparation for them. And his way of getting ready for something like that is to practice the songs and to like make sure he knows all the progressions really well and play all the licks. And my way of getting ready, like when I have time to come out here and just prepare, I'll do some of that, like the stuff I don't know that I like actually really need to learn. But I'll just play whatever is like speaking to me, whatever I feel like playing, and try and tune in to like the enjoyment of playing a song and like actually getting into like a space and a vibe and like feeling connected and feeling inspired. I guess that's the biggest thing, feeling inspired. And if I can like get to that point where I'm like, oh yeah, this is fun. I'm not just like grinding through these like songs trying to learn them. I'm like connecting to my art. Then everything seems to fall into place. And for me, that's more productive than like trying to practice these songs that I really don't want to play anyways.
Right.
If I'm being honest with some of those wedding songs, it's like, you're playing stuff that you don't actually like that much.
Yeah, you don't connect with it. Right?
Yeah.
But you're still able to do that, but it starts with going back to something that's familiar or that's brought you there. It doesn't.
Before. I can start writing a song, just something that makes me feel inspired and makes me feel like connected to the joy of playing music. And yeah, getting that like soul, mind,
Mm-hmm.
body connection all synced up. And same like, at gigs, it's like they'll sometimes it's like right off the bat, and sometimes it takes a few songs to like get to that spot.
Mm-hmm.
But then once I can feel it, once I like something clicks, everything after that sounds good, and it doesn't matter if what my voice is physically going through that day. It doesn't matter. None of the external things seem to be as big of an influence
Mm-hmm.
as that
Gotcha.
for me.
You talked before about how the drummer can kind of, it's a lot of the environment, or in a lot of that space. And I guess you've kind of been speaking to this directly or indirectly, just as far as like, the role of the drummer and stuff like that. Like, how do you communicate if something's not quite right? Like, how does that typically go in band communication?
Like in a live setting?
Yeah, maybe in a live setting, or and I know, maybe we talk about the different settings, like the biggest settings for you, like when you are playing with a drummer, like if it is recording or in a live setting or whatever.
I think if something doesn't feel quite right, I mean, I think you kind of just have to work in a live setting. You just have to like work with what's happening, and try and make the best outcome from whatever situation you're playing in. Like make the best version of that version,
Right?
Even if it's not exactly how you want it to be, And I like to be open and kind of allow things to unfold in natural ways and in new ways, and maybe it's not how I would, if I was going to record the song, maybe those aren't the choices that I would make for a recording or something permanent, but I don't get too upset if things aren't just exactly right. I think it's just a matter of like, maybe there's something that I can shift in the way I'm playing it, I'm approaching it to make that feel more cohesive and feel better.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not one to like micromanage at all.
Yeah.
Like I basically I might give like a little, like on the 5 Walnut gig, like we'll often, it's a weekly gig, and we don't rehearse for it very often, but we're always bringing new songs to the table. So every week we're playing songs we've never played together before or at all, and so maybe in the beginning of those, just say a few notes of like, yeah, let's try it like this, try like this kind of beat to it, but then it's just, then there's like an element of surrendering and just seeing what happens, and just trying to like be malleable to flow with whatever everyone else is doing too.
So it sounds like y'all are communicating like musically,
yeah, not verbally.
Right.
I don't like I find that like really annoying. When people try and micromanage me, like when they try and tell me like what to do, how to do it, when to do it,
right?
I'm like, let me just like do my thing.
I immediately
and
start
I want everyone
about,
else
like,
to do their
James
thing
Brown,
too.
Right. In a different style altogether. It
Yeah.
worked for whatever they were doing, but yeah. And then I think a lot more jazz musicians I hear about like talk about the way you do. I think Herbie Hancock was talking in an interview I saw. He was talking about it was Coltrane or someone that he was playing with at the time, but he hit something that was wrong. And then there was like a minute, and he saw the band leaders just kind of thinking, and then just like went with it, and it became the thing.
That's awesome.
Like it was not a mistake. It was, and he talked about how it was just presence, and like, this is what's happening right now at any point. Or like you'd hear about horn players, like a siren goes by and then they just find that key.
Yeah.
And they go along with it
I
or
love
whatever,
that.
Yeah. It's just always like and I think that's like the biggest thing I'm finding too, is just that coming back to presence and that focus, right? So that's something I talk a lot about with drummers too. So much to focus on. A lot of times we struggle with attention in other ways, but when it comes to drumming, like it requires a division of attention so much to like listen to everyone and kind of like in some ways, I don't know if I like the shepherd metaphor as much. Like you always hear about that, or like the backbone and these kinds of things. I feel like you are providing a framework, so to speak, of
For
like
sure.
where it goes. But like we've talked about, like you can cover up folks. You can, you can throw things off because there is a lot of power with the full range and volume of what you have
For
going.
sure.
But it is a lot to like pay attention to all at once.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and there's a lot of dopamine going on at that time, always, so sometimes like there's a recovery period right after you play and stuff like that. Do you find that the case? Like, do you have like, what is your energy level like after a show maybe?
I think there's a full spectrum,
Yeah.
I've definitely experienced that before, where like you're so like hyped up and so in it and focused, and then it's done, and after like 45 minutes, all of a sudden you're just like, whoa, you like crash.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes after like a really fun show, it's like you're
Ready
just
to
like
keep
hyped.
going.
Yeah.
Yep.
You're like don't want it to end.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. Crash comes later sometimes.
Yeah. Tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, one of the other things that I talk about too are like blocks in like practice. You mentioned it early, just with like playing, like figuring it out on your own, writing your own songs as young as 8 years old. There was no formal training for you up until college. But what was it like from 8 till, college? Like, how did you practice? Like, what method did you, maybe it was intentional or not intentional, but how did that continue?
Well, the choice to not take lessons was intentional.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I was like called to it. Like I begged my parents for a keyboard for Christmas. And I just knew I had like something inside me, and I immediately just started like playing and writing and figured it out. And some of those early songs of mine are really good. Like really, really good. Like they still hold up, and I've wanted to record them and like do a little EP of some of the ones I still remember.
Nice.
To keep those, because and I felt this protectiveness of my creativity, and I think it felt like this like little flame, this like little gift that I had to like protect. And for some reason I was concerned that someone coming in and telling me how to play and telling me how to sing and how I was supposed to do it, I felt like that was a threat to whatever I was doing, because it was so natural. And maybe that was right, maybe it was wrong, I don't know, but it worked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got there. And I mean, I think there's a lot to that, because that is a real risk.
Mm-hmm.
If it's gonna, I think that's, let me think about that.
It would have at least slowed me down a lot.
Yeah.
Like I would have had to take some steps back.
Right.
Instead of just like doing whatever,
Yeah.
get my fingering correct and like, I don't know.
Well, that's like, I've talked about this a lot, but in technique, like one of the things that's like a big topic of conversation these days is like playing open-handed versus crossing over, right? So like usually you see a drummer right hand on the hi-hat crossing over their left hand, which is on the snare drum, right? And now like everyone's trying to figure out ways to open up, because if you can play open, it leaves the whole kit at your disposal without having to like reach over and try to stretch or do some contortion to like get a note on the floor tom or whatever it is. And so, but for some reason we've always just been taught you got to cross over. This is how it goes. And I think it's primarily because like your timekeeping hand, like it used to be on the ride. And then at some point, like once the hi-hat was developed, then it became like, no, you got to ride over here. So I think it was just one of those, like in so much of music theory and all that kind of stuff, there's just arbitrary decisions that were made, right? Like why as Americans or Europeans do we have an octave, right? Like 7 notes represented where it then begins again, versus like in India where it might be like 15 or some odd number, or like wherever in the world you are. Like these are
Right.
just kind of chosen, sometimes arbitrarily, and it's the same kind of thing. So like, been teaching my daughter to play. She automatically puts her left hand on the hi-hat and the snare drum, and it almost corrected her. And I was like,
Yeah.
wait a second.
This
I
is
need to check.
natural.
No, I have to think. I have to think harder to try to help her learn, which is good because it changes my brain, and maybe that'll help me be more open on the kit too. But I think that's true. Like, there's definitely risk. It's a lot of faith in an institution and these old ways of thinking. Whereas, like, if you know it, like you've got something, let me figure it out.
Yeah.
Then you have more ownership over it too.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so then what was it like once you decided to go more formal training in college?
It was great because I feel like I had already established that little flame was like,
Untouchable.
it was untouchable by then. I wasn't 8, 9, 10 years old.
Yeah. Had you been gigging like through middle school, high school, or what was that like?
I did do some, but not a ton. No, I think I started really gigging in college.
Okay.
Well, actually, I played street music through Europe for about 9 months.
Like busking
Before college. So
I
I did do that.
I'm really interested in hearing more about this. I just want to check in on your time. Be respectful.
I think probably another 10,
Okay.
15 is fine. Yeah.
Might be worth talking about. Sometimes I worry about like repeating things over and over, but like right now, I don't care. Like I'm so excited about this band that I just learned about probably a year ago, and y'all covered them, but Hiatus Coyote.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so Perrin Moss is like one of the drummers that I'm just like blown away by.
Yeah.
And I think his story is very similar to yours. Like he was just following his interests.
Mm-hmm.
He was. Do you know much about his backstory in drumming?
I don't know anything about. I love that band, but no, I don't know anything about.
So he started off life, in Australia. Mom taking him to like drum circles.
Okay.
And the sense I get is like these Aboriginal drum circles that are going on in like the Green Mountains of Australia. So he gets that sense of rhythm, that sense of community, that feel that's very much polyrhythmic, just early. Then later on in life, from what I understand, he becomes like a hip hop producer. So he's working with an MPC or whatever, some drum machine. And he's producing music that way. But then he gets frustrated because he finds like the grid only allows for so many, it's not infinite amount of places that you can put the pocket or you can put the beat. So then he decides, like, as an adult, he's going to learn drums. And so he starts to learn drums. And then I think he was busking at the same time. This is where it like kind of struck me.
Yeah.
Like this is a different, exercise. This is a different way of thinking, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
So just to kind of like march it out for him. So then from what I understand, I think he sat down with a couple of members of the band, maybe Naomi, the lead singer, and then Bender, the bassist, I think, some combination. And he just has hand drums and he just sits in with them. Like, I don't know if he was invited or what, but they were welcoming, but it was like, it was just like a natural thing.
Yeah.
He starts playing and they're like, do you want to tour? And so then they like, and I don't know if he got like formal lessons as well. But I get the sense, I think I saw somewhere or heard somewhere that he did go to some kind of formal training for like a bit, but then like, I don't think he was playing the drum kit for like a year before he was like, they were really like blown up.
That is crazy.
So like his way of thinking is totally different. And I think it turns off some drummers because he's like, well, some of that's electronic. And there's still like that kind of that us versus them mentality. And technically speaking, he's no Jarvis Yoakley, right? Like he does not have the hand speed. He does not have all that, but he does have openness and he does have freedom. And that's what that band kind of represents for me. Like I look at each player up there when they're performing and it just seems like they're so open and free to me. That's what they kind of represent. And so, so that's like who I've been listening to and who I've been playing along with, because it is that openness, because I was like so heavy for so long, just like on the beat. This is it. Keeping time, jazz band in like middle school, high school.
Yeah.
It's like big band. So like you're just driving that. You're that time signature, right? And meanwhile, he's got all kinds of textures. He's a percussionist on the drum kits.
Right.
He's got electronic stuff that's supporting. Doesn't matter. He's like looking for that vibe.
Yeah.
And he's making it happen. So like it's that free artistry that's going on. So I've
Totally.
been totally inspired by someone who is not like the Nate Smith or someone else that I would typically follow. And I still love that style of drumming, but it's like just a different way of thinking and that approach that's like not institutionalized.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. So busking, what was that like through Europe, you said?
Yeah. So when I was 17, first I went to India. I like forgot about this. To study music for the first time. And I studied Carnatic vocals and the tablas, oddly, which I only,
it's a very vocal instrument.
It's a very,
there.
And yeah, I was supposed to be there studying for a year, and then I ended up leaving the center after like 3 months because I just wanted to go and be free.
Yeah.
But I never, on the tablas, I definitely like touched them, but they make you start off with speaking it.
Yeah.
Like da 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 da. Yeah, you have to like speak the rhythm. So I did that for a few months and did Carnatic vocals, and then traveled around India and had my guitar with me. I learned to play guitar on this trip. I had only played keyboards before that, but I knew I was going to be gone for a long time, so I bought a guitar before I left and started teaching myself, and traveled around India for about a year, and then ended up over in Europe eventually, and I busked through Europe for I think it was about 9 months, maybe a little more.
Mm-hmm. And it supported you through that.
It supported me through that. And I think that was.
And there you don't need like permits and stuff. I
No,
would imagine.
you're gonna set up wherever.
Like you did here, right?
And it was a really cool way to travel, because it always feels like when you're busking, when you just go, you're like walking around with your guitar and you like find a spot that feels good, and you start. It's kind of intimidating to like start that first song. You're like, cracking noise through the silence. You're like creating a space that wasn't there before, like trying to open some like window out of nothing. But then you do, and it like starts to you become a part of the city and a part of the vibe and a part of other people's experience, which is kind of a cool way to like give back when you're traveling, because you're like receiving so much from the places you're going. And it was really cool, and it was actually pretty good money.
Wow.
Also.
That's great.
They have like these coins that they throw in. You like don't realize that. You just see people like throwing a bunch of coins in, and then you like count them all up, and you're like, dang, that was like $90.
Nice.
Like people's pocket change.
Wow.
But I feel like that was my first experience. Even though I had done some gigs before that was my first experience, performing on some level for people, publicly. And yeah, it was just a very cool experience.
That is very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems very pure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I guess maybe we end with just like, I don't know. Maybe we just end there.
Okay.
Like I keep wanting to think, like, try to tie it back around, but I think really kind of what's amazing is, one of the things I'm also finding is like art finds a way. So like whatever blocks there are, like if you come back again, you're like staying true to your values ever since you were 8 years old.
Yeah.
And making that intentional decision, like there's something here.
Yeah.
It doesn't, like, it's for me and it's coming through me. Then as long as you try to stay true to that, then, it kind of works its way out. And so like temperamentally, like not a micromanager, like you have that experience early on. Like if you just kind of are open and true and to those things, then a lot of things will come for you.
Yeah, it'll serve the music. It'll serve me and everyone, if you can just connect to the inspiration, try and relax and like trust whatever's going to come out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for making the time.
Yeah,
and let me
thanks for
come over
having me.
here.
This is awesome.
Yeah, I look forward to your next show. I think I should be able to make it next Monday, right? At
Awesome.
5 Walnut.
Yep.
And then you've got Tuesday night shows at
Yep.
French Broad Outfitters
Yep.
in Asheville. And then any other regular gigs or anything else that's coming up that you want to?
Those are the only regular ones. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, CaroMia.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.